when I got into drug dealing.
You were like regularly going home and they had no idea you were selling drugs?
There's a part of everyone's personality that is extremely dark and twisted.
What was the most amount of money you had at one time?
Within a 6-month period, I made probably about $200,000. A young man comes up to me and he says, "Rabbi, you should know that because of your video, a friend of mine went to rehab and I stopped smoking weed." He got his hand on the phone, looked up my mother's phone number. Her son's life is in danger. I got slashed with a razor blade.
Yankel, welcome. We've heard some of your story, but not all of it. Can you take us all the way back to wherever you think it begins?
Okay, sure. First of all, thank you for having me on. No
Pleasure
problem.
to have you on.
Thank you. So I would say really my story begins as a young child, a bullied young child. That's where I would say my story begins, because from there, I sought out ways to soothe that pain that became eventually, I guess, an unmanageable habit that led me down the path that I went. So when I was growing up, I had a growth deficiency. I was like a small statured kid. And on top of that, my mother is a writer. So I had this gift, I guess, with words. And when I felt threatened by somebody, let's say, physically, let's say, I would find a way to put them down with my speech. And of course, the response to that was, they didn't like it very much. So the response to that was, physical. And I was no match. When I grew up in the era when all of us would watch the WWE, or it was, at that time it was WWF, and Stone Cold Steve Austin and Stunners, and there was a big sumo wrestler, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, and Undertaker and all that stuff. So
Rocky.
And The Rock, yeah, of course, The Rock and Shawn Michaels and whatever. And that was like kind of the way that we expressed ourselves. So I would use my mouth and they would use their physicality, and that really, I guess, put me in a place of feeling supremely inferior because I just couldn't keep up, right? Like, it's nice that I was able to put them down with a sharp, witty sentence or something, but in the end, everybody knows that the more physical person is the guy who's coming out on top. So in order to soothe that, I, in short order, found ways to shut my brain off and forget about that fact, an inconvenient fact of that I was small and not able to fight back. Really.
Do you see people in your regular life? Do you see people that remind you of yourself when you were in that time?
Well, I have kids, so sure, all the time. It's a fact of life, I suppose, that the strong prey on the weak when they can. It happens in business. It happens in, even when you're an adult, it happens. Somebody who doesn't pay an invoice is the same guy who probably used to beat up kids in high school or before.
Are we talking about high school this whole time? What age were you?
This started when I was probably 10, 11, 12, and it kept going. Then the stakes got a little bit higher, right? So when I got into drug dealing, then there were people who wanted to take over my business or rob me or, all kinds of stuff like that. That was more or less the same as what I had been going through when I was 10 years old, just now in a different form with higher stakes.
Before we get too far into any of it, what would you say your take is on your past and how you view it in general? Because a lot of people will carry around their past and maybe try to ignore it, or maybe that's only who they are. All they are is their past accomplishments. How do you view your past?
So the way that I relate to it is, I heard a really great quote from the Frierdiker Rebbe. He said he was a man who had gone through tremendous trials and tribulations in Russia. He was persecuted for being the Lubavitcher Rebbe, essentially.
Which Rebbe was he?
The Rebbe's father-in-law. They call him the previous Rebbe.
But he was in the line? Meaning he was officially a Lubavitcher Rebbe?
Yeah, the sixth. We're in the seventh.
Who's the Alter Rebbe?
That's the first Rebbe of Chabad.
Okay, fine.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the one we're talking about. So he was persecuted in Russia and went to prison for spreading Yiddishkeit. And somebody asked him later on, after he had gotten out, would you have preferred not to have gone through that? And he said, I wouldn't take $1 million to not go through that, but I also wouldn't take $1 million to go back. So that's the way that I try to relate to everything that happened to me, right? It made me the person who I am. I mean, if I hadn't have gone through everything that I had gone through, I don't think I would be sitting here appearing the way that I appear, having a family. The truth of the matter is, there's some alternate reality version where I'm just not alive anymore.
Why would you not be alive in that alternate reality?
The lifestyle that I was living tends to lead to one of three places: jail, mental institution, or death.
Not Chabad.
No. Well, one of those three.
Okay.
One of those three, some Lubavitchers have experienced.
So now if we could go further into it, what was that lifestyle? Because the term drug dealer, in my mind, can refer to a lot of different, it can refer to, did you watch Breaking Bad? Gus?
I didn't watch it, but I know that
So there's this guy who's running this giant cartel operation. He's technically a drug dealer. And then there's like a kid in school who has some extra weed and sells it every once in a while, is also a drug dealer.
True.
So when you say that, what does it mean?
Okay, so
what was that like?
So yeah, I was like somewhere in between, right? Like I started off in high school, and I was the kid in high school who was selling weed and supplying my high school. And then I went to a rehab. And
in high school?
Yeah, when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I was supposed to be there for 6 months. I ended up staying for 2 years because I kept figuring out ways to defeat their drug tests and go undetected. And eventually I would get caught. Long story short, I gained a master's degree in drug dealing at the rehab center. And I had plans to take over the world when I got out.
It's a pretty cool LinkedIn profile.
Yeah. So
were you in a Jewish school?
No.
Okay.
Not regular.
This is public school.
Public school
In
Oceanside High.
Oceanside,
right?
Long Island.
Okay.
Yeah. About 95% of my peers were getting high or drinking on the weekends. So I had a pretty nice pool of clientele to cull from. I wasn't the only one, but I still, I had a market share. So after I got out of the rehab, I had met some pretty serious gang members who introduced me to the next level up, which is the cocaine trade and not the weed trade. And that is a much more serious business. There's a lot more money involved. This was, thank God, like right before fentanyl and heroin started becoming very popular in America. So I got really, really lucky because that's really no joke. I mean, cocaine is serious too, but not people weren't dropping like flies in the early 2000s.
And that's what you mean by the alternate realities where you end up dead?
That's one possibility. Another possibility is, just being being killed by a rival drug dealer that I've
Would
had
be
my
your
life.
classmates in high school?
No, this was a little bit later on when the market share grew a little bit more and the amount of money I was making grew a little bit more. And the people that I dealt with were a lot more serious than high school kids. Or possibly if I had made it, if somehow by some miracle I made it to the era of fentanyl, who knows what could have happened with that? I mean, one bump the wrong way and you're gone.
What was your self-confidence like at that time? Well, how would you have described yourself?
I would describe myself as braggadocious, but not with very little power to back it up. So I took steps to prevent.
What does that word mean? I actually don't know.
Like somebody who kind of puffs himself up and makes himself more than he really is.
Okay.
I walked around like you would imagine that I had a high level of confidence, but really on the inside, I did not. So I took steps to make sure that my confidence level that I wouldn't be challenged on that. For example, okay, after I got out of rehab, I met up with some very high level gang members and I hired one of them to be my bodyguard, okay, and start an organization of people, right? So now the only person that really I had to be afraid of was him because everybody else was afraid of him. Therefore, they wouldn't mess with me because he was being paid to protect me.
How much does a bodyguard cost?
A lot of
that time?
cocaine.
Really?
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah, it is.
But the reason I was asking that is because if you take someone, and how old were you at the time?
19.
You were 19. If you take someone who's 19, believes they can do a lot, they're braggadocious, they think they can do a lot, the first thing you're doing is not going to deal drugs. For most people, at least in today's world, the way I see it, you go start a giant company. And if you think you can do anything, you could be the next Mark Cuban, you could be the next Richard Branson.
Well,
So what led you to
I wanted to
drug
be
deals?
the next Pablo Escobar.
Why?
Well, that's what I had known, number one. Number two is the way that I had grown up was, and this is early 2000s, right? So the possibilities were a little bit more limited than they are right now if I had started right now. So what had been ingrained in me was if you don't go to college and graduate with a good degree in something useful, not, some kind of dance theory, then you're essentially doomed to work at McDonald's. So here I became my own CEO. I made hundreds or thousands of dollars a day, depending on when it was. And no education was needed.
Hundreds of thousands a day?
Not hundreds of that, hundreds or thousands a day.
Every day.
Every day.
That was by the peak or just throughout the career?
Throughout the cocaine career, that's how it went. I mean, people have an insatiable desire for more and more and more. It never stops.
Wow.
Yeah. So they'll call you up, 4 or 5 times a day to just keep getting more.
What was the most amount of money you had at one time from doing this?
Probably 20,000 in cash, but you keep rolling it over, right? So within a 6-month period, I made probably about $200,000.
What was the most amount of money you had at one time from doing this?
Probably 20,000 in cash, but you keep rolling it over, right? So within a 6-month period, I made probably about $200,000. No, there was no such thing.
There were no people like that
Well,
that
first
were
of
just
all,
flexing their
we're talking
new wealth?
about way before the iPhone era. This was flip phones and Motorola's and, Blackberries was like, oh, wow, you're something. This was way before Instagram, way before people. I mean, the people that I saw who were flashing wealth like that were rappers, ball players, and drug dealers on TV essentially, or who they portrayed on TV. It was that was the extent of who you could see was really making it in this kind of world. I'm not a person who has a head for technology in that kind of way. And again, this is a thing where no education required, and you can make a good amount of money very quickly, so long as you don't get caught.
How would you rate your quality of life at that time?
Poor, very poor.
Why was it poor?
Because you have to be a servant or a slave almost all the time. You have to be on call 24/7. If a client calls you up in the middle of the night, the middle of the morning, the middle of the day, and they want their fix and you're not answering the phone, they'll move on, and then who knows if they'll come back to you. Maybe the next guy will have a better product and he answers the phone quicker. So you have to really be on call all the time. And that's why I created a team around me so that I wouldn't have to carry that burden all the time. But in addition to that, you can't even really trust anyone enough to take a break. Like I remember I wanted to go to, it was my birthday one year, and Wu-Tang was having a concert at Radio City Music Hall maybe in the summertime. And I wanted to go so bad, but I was like really afraid, because who am I gonna leave the business to while I'm away? Like a bunch of drug addicts who are my colleagues, so to speak. It didn't, to be honest, it was only one day and it didn't work out well. But I did get to meet Wu-Tang, so that was cool.
What was that like?
I came up to them after the show, like they were like walking outside, and they started walking down the street wherever this place was. I don't remember exactly. And I went up to them. I said, "Hey, great show." I didn't get their autographs because I wasn't like into that.
You tried selling them some coke?
So I lit up a blunt, like I lit up a joint right in front of them, and I hoping that like I would walk alongside and like they'd be like, "Hey, let me hit that." But they just kept it going, and I stopped following them after a while because that would be creepy.
What do you think made you special that you made it in this space? I would think a lot of people were trying to or are trying to.
In the drug dealing space?
What's your advice to someone who wants to sell drugs?
So
in 2025.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think separated me out was I personally never used cocaine. I didn't. There was a song in the early 90s, mid 90s, the 10 Crack Commandments, and one of them is never get high on your own supply.
Who's that by?
Biggie.
Biggie.
Yeah. So I stuck to that as much as I could, and I never used the product that I was selling. So it made me a better businessman. My head was a little bit more on straight, even though I was smoking weed, 24/7, but I wasn't like them,
Did you like that music, or you were just in the culture that's the music you listen to?
I guess I liked it.
Would you still listen to it today?
I've heard rap songs, even like listening back to those songs, it doesn't resonate with me anymore. Like I'm not about that lifestyle, so it doesn't really, I don't really feel it.
It spoke to you then.
It spoke to me then because I was living that life.
Are there any positives that you can take out of that whole, even before rehab, or I guess this is after rehab, but what were the lessons that you could take out of that?
Well, a business is a business, right? So, the way that I was able to stack my chips and double down and lead a group of, 10 guys who were unruly, to say the least.
What were 10 guys doing? 10 guys?
Well, one was my bodyguard. One was an enforcer. One was...
What's an enforcer?
What's the structure? What's the structure of your operation? Because I know there's mafias, there's like cartels, syndicates.
Yeah.
And I assume it's to build trust, no? By having a structure?
I think it's to keep everyone in line is more the ideal. Because otherwise, and what ends up happening sometimes is there's coups. The guy, the second in line, wants to be the head, and there's only one way to get rid of the head.
And who kept your thing in line? The bodyguard?
Yeah.
So who else was part of your
So an enforcer and then a bunch of soldiers who were on the street selling.
Sounds like a video game. That's wild.
It is wild.
Before we get to everything you're doing after,
Sure.
if we could just touch on rehab, because you said you were there for a while.
I was.
So-
Multiple times.
Do you have thoughts on just how, if someone who isn't even struggling, were there lessons that you were forced to learn from rehab that you still use or that we could use?
Yeah. So, and one of the things that sticks with me in the second rehab I went to, the final one, the one that really, when I was just a broken person. I mean, we can get into that too, of how I got to that point. But they asked me to do a mind exercise. What would happen if you were to get high today? How long would it take you to get back into full-blown, gangster mode? That was, for me, that's what it was. For other people, it was whatever they were doing. And I realized that it would probably only take about 2 weeks until I would get my hands on a gun and start my business up again if I got high today.
So that's still inside of you.
So yeah, well, for sure. I mean, an addict, it's there. I haven't had a drink or a drug in 18 and a half years.
Are you scared?
Was I scared what?
Are you scared today of what can happen if you?
I'm not actively scared, but I have a healthy relationship with that fear to the extent that I will not put myself in a situation where there's even a slight amount of temptation because the stakes are way too high.
It's not like you're going to build a whole new drug cartel.
No, it would be exactly like
it would be?
Yeah, for sure.
That's no offense, but I would never have that kind of instinct or motive. Why is that so?
Well, because it's an expensive habit.
You're so far from that today.
That's true. And it would only take, I've seen people who are in recovery for years and they slip up and it takes a very, very short time for the roller coaster to just hit 60 miles an hour and they're right back where they were before they started, even though they became a totally different person and years passed. But if it's in you, it's in you and it doesn't really go away. It's kind of like a dormant illness. What?
Can you sniff that out in other people? Can you see if they have that deep?
No, it's self-diagnosed. I don't know if people have it or don't. Some people, they think they're addicted and then they'll stop and then they can go back and moderate. It's very rare if you're really an addict. If you really get to the point where you're out there seeking help from anonymous groups or from therapies or coaching or whatever, you're probably an addict. Otherwise, you would be able to stop on your own. And then you would just stop.
Have you heard about the shadow side? I think it's from Carl Jung, but that there's a part of everyone's personality that is extremely dark and twisted. Does that resonate at all? Do you think that's true, that it's part of a person?
I haven't really considered that thought too much, but there's no question that there is a shadow side. I don't know if I would go so far as to say it's twisted and disgusting or whatever the language.
Well, the opposite of everything holy that you're doing now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you can call that holy,
sure.
I would say
yeah,
the opposite can be pretty dark.
That's true. It definitely can get very dark. How dark? Each person, I guess, has their own level of darkness within inside them that they would be willing to go to. Because not everybody is a psychopathic killer, right? Some people
Hopefully,
are,
yeah.
But most people are not, thank God.
So how did you make it out of this?
I also want to know what the bad part, what that was like before you went to rehab the last time.
Yeah, okay. So those two questions are intimately related. So we had this crew, my bodyguard and the next guy, the enforcer, happened to be that they had grown up together. They were really good friends. And the enforcer doubled or moonlighted, I guess you could call it, as a hitman for the mafia. That was his thing, his other job. And when he found out that my bodyguard was using heroin, which is like a big no-no in the mafia for whatever reason. I mean, I can imagine why. I don't know exactly, but it makes you particularly vulnerable to police interrogation. The stakes are a lot higher. The penalties, the jail is a lot longer when you get caught with heroin. So you're much more likely to rat on your friends giving that long of a prison sentence. So when he found out that my bodyguard was using heroin, we were living in motels from week to week. We would live in a motel, some, different places in Long Island, shady spots. We would stay at a motel 1 week and then move to another one, just so not to arouse suspicion from the authorities. And
you're the person I'm scared about when I stay at a motel.
yeah. So when we were at these motels, I would sometimes go home to take a break, because when I was sleeping at the motel and the business is running through that room, it's very hard to really rest, especially because all the different characters of people that you're inviting into that space, and you're trying to sleep during that, it's just not cohesive. It doesn't really go so well. So I would take breaks to go to my parents' house and go back home, and my phone would stay in the motel with the people who were on call or whatever. And the bodyguard, he had the phone, and the enforcer went to the motel to meet with him, and he got his hand on the phone, looked up my mother's phone number, and called her and told her that your son is in danger. The bodyguard is a crazy person who's addicted to heroin and cocaine, and he had been extorting me essentially for a little while at this point, and your son's life is in danger. I got slashed with a razor blade. I got punched in the face so hard that one of my teeth is not real, because
which one?
The front.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
So it wasn't a lie what he was saying. I just didn't really want to admit it. I was hoping that my bodyguard would go to prison for of not paying his what do you call that when you have child support. But that never, he kept saying, I'll turn myself in tomorrow, and it never really happened. So my mother got this phone call, and of course she was frantic and nervous. She's a nice Jewish lady, whatever.
How much did she know at this point about what you were doing?
So they had an inkling about what I was doing, but not
really
to this extent. No, I mean, no, definitely not. Even though I'd been in rehab, and basically the day I turned 18, more or less I told them, I'm out of here. You can't control me anymore. I'm not a danger to society as far as you know, and I'm done with this. So they knew that I might be getting high, but I was a master manipulator and liar, I would say, to convince them that everything was fine. And, there was probably a time when I single-handedly held up the Visine company from all the drops that I used to cover up my bloodshot eyes from getting high all day. And I did everything I possibly could to keep it going.
You were regularly going home, and they had no idea you were selling drugs?
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you were good at hiding.
Yeah, I was masterful. I had a poster in my room that was covering up a hole in the wall that I stapled a bandana around so I could put things into the wall and hide them there. And the poster was just covering it up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do they know that now?
No. Now they do. But now anyway, yeah. So
So then how do you get out?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And then they called your mother.
So he called my mother. Yeah, thank you. He called my mother. My mother tells me, my mother and father sat me down and they said, listen, you have a choice. You can either leave that life and we'll help you get out, or you have to leave the house. We love you, but I have a younger sister, you're putting her in danger, you're putting us in danger. Your lifestyle is dangerous and we can't have it anymore. And it took me a day, but I came to the realization that there was no way that this was gonna work without having to eliminate my bodyguard, which would anyway defeat the purpose of what I'm trying to do, because if you take such a drastic step, you have to go into hiding and then the whole business would collapse anyway. So what would be the point? So I decided to leave. And my father, he is a drug therapist and he helped me to get into a rehab in Florida, which was far enough away that they couldn't really drive there. And that's where my story continued.
And then, so post-rehab, you said you got back into it and then you went to another rehab.
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I would go to a rehab high school, essentially. It was out on Long Island. They would pick me up in one of those short buses every morning, and we would drive about an hour to the rehab. And that was the place that I was supposed to be there for 6 months, but ended up being there for 2 years plus. And then is when I graduated to the big leagues, which lasted a very short time comparatively. And then I went to rehab, the rehab to end all rehabs for me.
What was it like when you left that rehab?
Which one?
The second one, the one that worked.
Yeah, so at that point, when I was in rehab, I started to become more spiritual because I was so broken that they had a program of going to Alcoholics Anonymous and really following the steps. You know, if you're familiar with the 12 steps of the anonymous programs, and getting a sponsor and doing all the stuff that they want that a successful anonymous person does. So because I was done. I knew that I was done. I did what they said. And I was at a meeting one night, and there was this cute little grandma lady speaking at this anonymous meeting. And she was telling the story of the binding of Isaac, Kedas Yitzchak. I had heard this story from Hebrew school when I was growing up, but I never really gave it much thought. But as she was speaking, I realized that this could be a story about me, you know, in the metaphoric sense, right? Like, except that in the real story, Abraham schleps Isaac, so to speak. I mean, Isaac went willingly, it says, that's what Rashi says, but he didn't really know exactly what he was getting into. And in my story, I'm Isaac, but I schlepped my father into this whole mess that I had gotten myself into, right? So for that really touched me, and I started to cry, which is something that I hadn't done in many, many years as a hardened drug dealer, I guess you could call it. And I just realized, you know, what am I doing? What have I done? What am I doing? And how miraculous it is that I'm here. You know, how many people walking earth get to say that their life was saved by a hitman, and I'm here to tell my story.
So what do you do after that? Because now you have just this rock bottom and then sort of a switch.
Yeah.
Where do you go from there? Because it's just new life, start over.
Yeah, rebuild, really.
What age was this?
19, 20.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really rebuilding. So I met a Chabad Shliach in Florida who.
Why and how? Why did you meet the Chabad
how did you
Shliach?
meet?
Oh, sorry. Okay, so I was in this rehab which was run by a secular Jew. I don't remember his name, but thank you. If you're listening, thank you so much. So after I heard this story of the binding of Isaac, I asked my father to send me those black boxes that I wore at my bar mitzvah, send me a talis, send me the Torah. You know, I didn't know the terms exactly, but I asked him to send me these things because one of the main principles of Alcoholics Anonymous or the Anonymous programs is that you have a God of your understanding, right? So
what does that mean?
Exactly. That's a God that something that you can relate to, right? Whatever that means to you. So I started experimenting with different things. First, it was like the doorknob is going to be the God of my understanding, because without turning the door, you can't get from one place to another. You can't go from one level to the next. But that didn't stick. The feeling didn't stick with me for all that long. But on further contemplation about how amazing it was that I was still alive, the only logical explanation that I came to was that it must be God looking out for me. And what God do I know? Well, I heard of God from Hebrew school, a few years before. And so I started to get into experimenting with Judaism in some kind of way. So when I first started, there was another guy in the Rehab who had grown up, I guess, modern Orthodox. And he told me, you take 3 steps back, 3 steps forward, you bow a few times. I had no clue what I was doing. I knew how to read Hebrew, but I didn't know what I was saying.
What he was doing?
More than I did. Okay. I don't know exactly more than I did. That's for sure. And I wrapped myself in a bed sheet as a tallis and prayed like a person who was just desperate to get out.
What were you looking for in them aside from just getting out? What was it that you were hoping would happen? Because it's a pretty extreme thing to do for someone who at least didn't practice any religion until that point, to just switch and all of a sudden you're doing all these things.
Yeah, that's true. I was hoping that by attaching myself to a higher power or God that I understood, that I would relieve myself of the compulsion to go back to the life that I had been living. Because like I said before, I had seen people, even in the rehab, when I was in my first rehab, I found all kinds of different ways to get high and keep it going, even though I was under very restrictive circumstances, even though I was getting drug tested weekly. I figured out ways of how to beat the system. So I knew that a little slip up could be catastrophic.
Did you imagine what it would look like? Because I see, just this past week, I saw Russell Brand. You know Russell Brand?
Sure.
This whole thing happened, and now he's on his Christianity faith journey kind of thing. And he posted this video of him leading some sort of ceremony where all these people are getting baptized in the ocean. And he's one of them. And he went from this person whose at least public image was really tarnished based on things that I don't know if he did or didn't do them. And to me, seeing that, I'm like, you can't just go in the ocean and then everything didn't happen. So what's going on in your brain at that time when you're like, putting this talus over my head can just make it go away?
Well, it doesn't. That's the thing. It doesn't make it go away. But that's also one of the benefits of being in an anonymous program, right? Because one of the steps is to make amends for the pain that you've caused, and wherever possible. And that was something that I had to do, to apologize to some of the people that I had hurt. And some of them I wasn't able to apologize to, so I would have to write them letters and and burn it, I guess, because there was nowhere else to put it because they were gone already.
In that moment also, what if part of what you were looking for was forgiveness? What reason did you see for you to deserve that forgiveness? Why should God forgive you in that moment?
I don't know if I was looking for forgiveness per se. I was looking for connection. Because the fact of the matter is that I did some pretty nasty things in my life. And
I'm trying to get at really some sort of description of, maybe it's I forgot what the actual term is, for how you would describe God or Hashem, because part of it is seeing this force that is fatherly, that loves you so much that no matter what you did, wants the best for you. So how would you describe Hashem? Maybe in that moment and maybe the way you understand Hashem now.
Well, I would say at first it was very rudimentary of what it is that I'm expecting from God, so to speak. And then later on, it evolves more into what can I do for him as opposed to what can he do for me. So I don't really think all that much about being absolved of my past so much as trying to, I guess, make amends for it by the way that I live now. So I'll give you a perfect example, okay? Monday, this week, Shavuos, okay? I was coming out of shul, 770. We go on Talucha on Shavuos.
Onto what?
What is
Talucha,
that?
it's called. You go to other shuls and you say a Dvar Torah over there. So from 770, Lubavitchers are going all 5 boroughs if they can. Like there are literally people who will walk to the Bronx. It's crazy.
On Shavuos?
On Shavuos.
That's on the night of Shavuos.
Yeah, well, from the afternoon, I guess, of the first day, right? Like right after Shachris, depending on how far you have to go. But I was having guests, so I went to a place a little bit closer, like a 20-minute walk. And I'm debating when I should leave shul and whatever. I meet up with a friend of mine, a colleague, and I decide I'm going to walk out with him. So I waited for him to finish davening, and as I'm walking out, a young man comes up to me, and he says, "Rabbi, you should know that because of your video, a friend of mine went to rehab, and I stopped smoking weed."
Wow.
So there is nothing that I can do to make up for the past. The things that I've done are done. But I can live my life now in a way that inspires other people not to go down that path.
So what is the mission now?
The mission now is...
If you would even call it. It doesn't have to be a mission. It could
Well,
just be
no,
your
I
life.
definitely think it is a mission. I agree with that wording that you used. I like that a lot. The mission now is to help people to live the best possible life that they can. Because even after I became frum, and even after I became, even after I got married and lived a little bit of life, a little bit more, not necessarily does that mean that you're living the best life that you possibly can. And I don't mean that in the sense of like how many times did you go visit Mexico or Thailand or whatever, how many exotic trips have you gone and what kind of car do you drive? Good for you that you drive a Rolls Royce or whatever, but I don't mean that. I mean the way that we walk around living like as a complete version of ourselves, the happiest version of yourself, the most fulfilled version. What is the purpose?
That's a big mission. Are there any steps that you could break it down into, or maybe core points that you've seen? For yourself, how have you approached finding yourself or finding true happiness.
Are you
Whatever
happy
words you would
today?
use.
Yes, I am.
Oh.
Yes, I am definitely happy today. Yes, I am very
You were
fulfilled.
smiling when you walked in here, by the way.
Yeah,
So.
100%. I am very fulfilled and definitely feel like I'm living my purpose. The way that it started off for me and what I try to do for other people is I was living in an imaginary box that I created, a box of my own making of what my own capacities and limitations could possibly grant me. For example, I never thought that it was possible that I could write a book. But yet, here it is. I have written a book. I never thought that it was possible that I could tell my story in front of hundreds of people. And yet I was hired to speak at a Chabad house for 200 plus people on a Shabbos. I never thought that it was possible that I could get onto a podcast and, have thousands and thousands of views, or that somebody would come up to me on Shavuos and say, because of your video, I stopped getting high. So once you break that box and you start to look outside of what your self limitations that you've created are, all of a sudden the world opens up in amazing ways. Like, for example, I bet 2 years ago, you could never have imagined that you would have a studio here in Midtown Manhattan and look at how cool this place is, It just hard to imagine. I'm not saying that you were inside a box, but most people, that's how most people view themselves, right? They can only see what's basically in front of them. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are not aware of their own greatness, I would say. And when somebody starts to shine a light on that greatness, and you yourself as the person who's trying to achieve what someone else sees of you, a lot of very interesting things start to happen.
Was there anyone in their life, in your life, that gave that message to you? Or did you have to learn it by yourself?
No way. It would have taken a very long time for me to learn that message by myself, if ever. I had a dear friend who became a coach, and he offered to have a conversation with me. And at first I wasn't sure, he's not that much older than me. This is weird. Mm-hmm. I don't know. And I got to a point where I was just so frustrated with the status quo that I wanted something better for my life. And I said, you know what? I'll give it a shot. I'll have a conversation with you. And I spoke to him maybe the first time for hours, a few hours. And he just blew my mind from the concepts that he was talking about, the possibilities that he saw in me, for me, and I've been working with him basically ever since.
Who is after rehab?
Yeah, this is like 5 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Who is coaching meant for? Because I see psychologists, I see rehab.
Yeah.
I see friends.
Yeah.
Social workers.
Yeah.
So who's the right type of person that should be going to a coach over any of those other types of people? Okay,
great. I love that distinction. So a lot of what therapy is, and this is not, let me just put a disclaimer here. This is my personal opinion. It's not a professional or whatever. I don't know. This is not like the truth be all end all opinion. This is my personal opinion of what the major differences between coaching and therapy is. So therapy, a lot of it, and my father is a therapist. I have tremendous respect for them. This is not to knock them at all. A lot of what therapy attempts to do is to heal the past in the past. So if you've ever been to therapy in any way, a lot of what you may talk about is, let's say you bring up even a topic that happened yesterday, but what does that topic yesterday have to do with what happened to you a while ago that has you reacting in the way that you are today from then, right? So let's go back to the past. Let's heal the past. And that will help change what your current reaction will be, right? Because if you're traumatized from when you were 8 years old, when somebody comes up to you and tries to bully you and you put them down with your words, let's say if I'm taking my own past as an example, let's try to heal that trauma from when you were 8. And maybe hopefully you'll react differently now. Okay, that is a main premise of how I understand therapy. I personally have been to lots and lots of therapists through my life. Again, this is my experience, my opinion of how I experience therapy. Coaching, on the other hand, starts with a different premise. The premise of coaching is, let's just assume for a moment that you are not a victim in this moment right now of your circumstances, of your past, of anything. Let's say you are a totally empowered person right now. What can you do now to improve your situation going forward? Let's say you want to be a coach, or you want to be an author, or you want to be a podcaster, but you're saying to yourself, nobody wants to hear what I have to say. You're going back to the victimhood of when you were a child, of, who knows what happened to you. Somebody didn't listen to you, and you're pained by that. So instead of going back to the past and healing that, well, let's say, what can you do now? What if you're not a victim? Because a lot of people unconsciously really attach themselves to that mentality. Like, being a victim is very seductive, because essentially it means I don't really have to do anything now, and I have this card that I get to take out of my pocket all the time when people say, well, how come you're not a great podcaster, or how come you're not a great coach? You say, oh, look here, I'm a card-carrying member of the victimhood society.
You think that's a valid response? Like, it's kind of a lame response to be like, I'm a victim, that's why.
Right, well, I'm saying that people use that card subconsciously as a reason.
No one's saying it verbally.
No,
okay,
well,
fine.
Maybe not verbally. Maybe they would inside of a coaching session, perhaps, or a therapy session. But I'm saying people walk around with that energy. Like, why? You ask somebody, why aren't you better at what you do? Let's say, why? How? So let's say you're talking to a friend of yours, a dear friend, and he's I don't know, he's a stockbroker, maybe, and he's not doing as good as he could potentially be doing, or he would like to be doing better. Why aren't you doing better? Well, the market is not good, and the tariffs and this and that. But notice that.
Not my fault.
Not my fault. Not my fault. It's not me. It's not the fact that I'm, not doing the research needed in order to pick the right things, or I'm not getting there on time. Whatever it may be, that people would like to deflect away from themselves in order to not take the blame, and then therefore be empowered to do something about it. Hopefully. Rather, they pull out the card, tariffs, stock market's down, bear market, whatever, inflation, blah, blah, blah. Victimhood.
And coaching helps you get past that victimhood?
Well, coaching will call you out on that victimhood and propose a scenario which you are actually not a victim, in which you are in total control.
And that's true? Or that's a fake?
That's how I believe it.
Okay.
I believe that to be true. And if that's true, then what are you going to do about it?
Have you found coaching to be more helpful to you personally than therapy? Because it sounds like you can't fully heal your past. I'm not sure. Maybe you can.
I don't know. I don't know if you can fully heal your past. Let's put it this way. I'm really glad that for every modality that I've ever done, that got me to where I am now. I don't know what would happen had I been absent the therapy that I've done to get me to the point where I was ready for coaching. I don't know. So I'm thankful for what I did receive, or what I did experience in the therapy world. And I'm also super grateful for what the coaching world has propelled me to.
What would you say to either someone who's in it right now, maybe they're addicted to something, or maybe it's the direct relationships, the family of someone who's addicted to something, because personally, I don't understand that perspective, that experience at all. So what would you say to that person?
I'm really sorry that you're going through that. There's very little that you can tell an addict themselves that will get them over the hump from I love getting high to I don't, without them having a strong desire to do so, right? That's the whole idea of the being compelled by addiction. It's super difficult. And if you are a family member of somebody who's in that situation, I have a tremendous amount of compassion for you. And I have what I would say to you as advice, let's say, is to create a situation where you are no longer the lifeline for the addict to continue his addiction, however difficult that may be, in the most loving way that you can possibly do so.
How does a lifeline usually present itself? Because I wasn't expecting that at all, to go into a lifeline.
So I'll give you an example, okay? When I was living at my parents' house and in the middle of addiction, or even, when I was living at my parents' house in the middle of addiction, let's say I was short a few dollars for food, or if I was short a few dollars to get high, what did I do? I went to my parents' room and I, helped myself to enough money to get what I wanted. And they knew that it happened. They caught me a bunch of times and they allowed me to stay in their house, which meant that I was using them as a lifeline to my addiction. Or it could even be, let's just say you live in a house where there's no cash and the addict doesn't have your credit card numbers, nothing, but you're giving them a roof over their head, right? So now, instead of them hitting rock bottom faster, you are slowing the process down, but you're not really doing them any favors by doing that because they're still getting high all the time. And now they're just doing it under your roof.
Not very balanced, the relationship.
It's not a balanced relationship. It's a relationship where there's one side who is just taking, and the other side who's just giving.
Without a parent, who can that lifeline be?
A spouse. Could be, in certain circumstances, I guess it could be an adult child, right? Like if you had a father or a mother who, God forbid, was an addict, and they beg you to stay by your house, and who knows what kind of things that they would manipulate to come up with as a good reason why this is going to work. But nonetheless, they're using your house as their base of operations.
Would you bring an addict into your house?
Not one who is in the throes of addiction.
You're saying post-addiction?
I would, yeah. If you are not high right now, sure. Or you are looking to not be high right now and you're actually not high right now, then yeah.
Also, do you think that there are any words that you could tell yourself in addiction? Because you know yourself better than, I guess, most people would. And are there any words that you could have told yourself that you think would just snap yourself out of addiction?
No.
Nothing?
No. Nothing. It had to happen the way that it happened, in exactly the way that it happened. And I'm very, very lucky that my rock bottom wasn't at the bottom of a casket.
What do you think about recreational drug use?
Personally?
Yeah.
I'm not very in favor of it, to be quite honest. I don't see why everyone is trying to escape from life. Like, well, if your life is bad and you want to escape by getting high, then create a better life. And if life is not that bad, then where are you going? Why can't you be in it?
Well, I agree with you, and that's pretty much my take. But if I see or talk to people that go to raves, or a festival, I can imagine that if someone goes to a festival, it'll be way more enjoyable. You'll have heightened sensations if you're on a recreational drug.
That's true.
So what are you escaping? You're raising your senses.
You are escaping. You're escaping the being present at the rave as you. Instead, you have to show up as you on ecstasy.
And if anything, you being at the rave as yourself is like, why should I even be here?
Maybe you might come to that conclusion. That's a possibility. But you might just, experience it as yourself. Like why does it have to be that raves equal pacifier sucking teenage young adults? Like that's weird because you're on ecstasy. I don't get it. I don't see the need for that.
So you think there's no use for it? Even, let's say, all over New York, you have all these marijuana CBD places.
Yep, 100%. I mean, my personal opinion is that we would probably be better without it. That's my personal opinion. However, if you're able to use it and not get sucked into that lifestyle and get totally taken over by it, okay, good for you. That's fine. I don't judge people. I mean, you can't walk anywhere in New York without smelling the lovely smell of a burning blunt or something.
Skunk town.
Yeah, that's what it is. So okay, to each his own, I suppose.
Does that smell trigger something inside of you?
Not anymore. It's I'm past that. Now it's just like, ugh.
What do you see in the future? What's happening?
In the future for myself?
Yeah.
And tell me more about the book also. What was the point of the book?
Well, hold on. I'm gonna try to do one question at a time.
My bad.
It's okay. So in the future for myself, what I would love to be doing is coaching really high-powered men into complete, full lives of like the best of what they could possibly be doing. So there are a lot of people who might be, let's say, a CEO of a company, but they have it's not a balanced, complete life. There's probably less spirituality in that world. There's less family in that world, less monogamy in that world, I would imagine, less presence in that world. So that's what I would love to be doing on a personal level. If I'm dreaming really big, I would love to write a memoir about my life. This is not that. And have it made into a movie. That would be amazing.
It could be.
It could be.
Yeah. Sounds.
Just hearing that, because that part of your life ended at 19?
20, yeah.
So is there a part of you that sees hopefully the next 100 years after that, 101 years? That's just like, that was not my life. Maybe that was a small part of it. But it sounds like it's almost defining who you are.
Well, I wouldn't want the movie to end, at that period of my life. Like, I would like it to follow me into a successful human being. Like that. I don't see it being, a mafia movie where the end is the main character gets killed like in Scarface. This would be more like a redemption movie, where you go into the darkness and you come out and it's light. So,
what's the blinding light? Because right now this is like you're out of that.
Yeah.
But I'm imagining if I would have gone through that sort of transformation, I would just be like, what is next? What's happening in the next couple of decades that I have to look forward to if this is it?
What is the it here?
If everything happened already,
Oh, you mean all the exciting parts of my life?
Then what's supposed to happen now?
Yeah, I don't know if I would agree with that necessarily. I mean, it's true. I definitely had a very exciting, what do you call that age group, or the young adulthood, adolescence, yeah, and a little bit onward. I mean, living in Israel for a few years was not lacking in excitement either. And the truth of the matter is that even today, I don't lack in excitement, right? Like even in my own life, I do interesting things. I like it. I'm proud to be raising a Hasidic family with 6 kids and have, that's a whole nother part of my life that we didn't even really talk about in any way. So life isn't over. It's just beginning now. Now I have to look forward to a legacy, I suppose, creating what it is that people will remember me by.
What do you like about Hasidus? Why do you choose Chabad? Why do you even choose Judaism?
What did I like about Hasidus? So I would say that the influence of Judaism that I had gotten when I was growing up was, I'm not even sure what you would call the philosophy, but very, very kind of a negative connotation, almost like if you don't do this, then you're going to be stricken, and like kind of very doom version of what God is like that I had gotten from growing up, even though like nobody actually did this stuff. So it was kind of weird messaging, like very hypocritical. But when I was introduced to Hasidus, it was, well, first of all, who else would have allowed a former drug dealer like into their house where their kids are? At that time, there weren't many people who were inviting in that way and make you feel like a king. So that was the first thing, right? Like, this is where you belong. And then in Hasidus itself, the philosophy is one of love for Hashem, and love from Hashem to you, and much less of a strictness that if you don't do this and this and this, then something bad is gonna happen to you, like I had kind of grown up with. And the reason for Chabad Hasidus is because they're the ones who got to me first, I suppose. That's just the way that Hashem planned it out, is that I should find the Rebbe, or the Rebbe should find me. I don't know.
Thank you, Yankel. I learned a ton. That was so interesting.
Thank you.
And thank you for being so upfront and honest.
You're so cool.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.